My father looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You don't deserve a single dollar of my fortune." He signed the papers right there, cutting me out of his $50 million empire. Though what he didn't know was that my dying grandmother had already given me a secret letter that would destroy his perfect plan and expose the darkest family secret that had been buried for 32 years. If you want to know how I went from being disinherited to owning everything, and how I discovered the truth that shattered my entire family, stay until the end because this story will blow your mind. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. But before I continue telling my story and how everything happened, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing where you all are from. My name is Marcus, I'm 32 years old, and until 3 days ago, I thought I knew everything about my family. I was the disappointment son, the one who chose art over business, the one who refused to follow my father's footsteps in his construction empire. For years, Robert Harrison, my father, made it clear that I was a failure in his eyes. What I never imagined was that everything I believed about my life was a lie. Every fight, every harsh word, every moment of rejection had a reason I never could have imagined. The day that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. I was in my small art studio, trying to make ends meet with my paintings, when my phone rang. It was my father's lawyer. "Marcus, you need to come to the office immediately. Your father wants to make changes to his will." My heart sank. I knew what that meant. After our last fight about my irresponsible choices, he had threatened to disinherit me completely. I was right. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, my father was already there with my stepmother, Linda, and my half-brother, James. They all had satisfied smiles on their faces. The lawyer read the new will. James would inherit the entire $50 million empire, the houses, the companies, everything. I would get nothing. "You don't deserve anything, Marcus," my father said with cold eyes. "You've been nothing but a disappointment your entire life." I signed the acknowledgement papers with shaking hands and left that office feeling destroyed. But when I got home, I found something that would change not just my life, but reveal a truth so shocking that it would turn my father's world upside down. When I walked into my apartment that afternoon, defeated and humiliated, I found something strange on my doorstep. It was a thick manila envelope with my name written in my grandmother's unmistakable handwriting. My heart stopped. Grandma Rose had died 2 weeks ago, and I had been devastated. She was the only person in the family who truly understood me. Inside the envelope, there was a handwritten letter and several official documents. My hands trembled as I began to read. "My dear Marcus, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you and that your father has probably already carried out his threat to disinherit you. What I am about to reveal will shock you, but you deserve to know the truth about who you really are." The letter continued. 32 years ago, when you were born, your father made me promise to never tell you the truth. But I can no longer take this secret to my grave. Marcus, Robert Harrison is not your biological father." I had to read that sentence 3 times before it sank in. Not my biological father, that was impossible. I looked just like him, or at least that's what everyone always said. But Grandma Rose continued, "Your real father was my eldest son, Michael Harrison, Robert's older brother. Michael died in a car accident when you were just 2 years old. Robert adopted you and promised to love you as his own son, but something changed in him over the years." The letter revealed that Michael had been the true heir to the Harrison family fortune. When he died, everything should have passed to me, his only son. But Robert had manipulated the legal documents, making everyone believe that I was his biological son so he could control the inheritance. The most shocking part came next. Robert has spent the last 30 years embezzling money from your father's trust fund, using it to build his own empire. The $50 million fortune he's so proud of. It was built with money that rightfully belongs to you. My grandmother had gathered evidence for years. Bank statements, legal documents, recorded conversations, everything was in that envelope. She had been planning to expose Robert, but her illness progressed too quickly. "I'm entrusting you with this truth, Marcus. Your father, Michael, would be proud of the man you've become. Don't let Robert continue this lie." At the bottom of the letter, there was a final revelation that made my blood run cold. "Robert knows about your art talent because Michael was also an artist. He's been trying to destroy that part of you because it reminds him too much of the brother he betrayed. Linda knows the truth too. They've been planning to get rid of any evidence of your real parentage for years. I sat in my living room, surrounded by 30 years of lies, holding proof that my entire life had been built on deception. The man I had spent my whole life trying to please, trying to make proud, was actually my uncle who had stolen my inheritance and destroyed my father's memory. The rage that consumed me at that moment was unlike anything I had ever felt. The next morning, I couldn't sleep. I spent the entire night going through every document my grandmother had left me. There were bank statements showing suspicious transfers, legal documents that had been altered, and most damaging of all, recorded phone conversations between Robert and Linda discussing how to handle the Marcus situation permanently. In one of the recordings, I heard Linda say, "We need to make sure he never finds out the truth about Michael. If he discovers that he's the real heir, we lose everything." Robert's response made my stomach turn. "Don't worry, I've been breaking his spirit for years. Soon he'll be so defeated that even if he found out, he wouldn't have the courage to fight us." That's when everything clicked. Every harsh criticism, every time he called me a failure, every moment he destroyed my self-esteem, it was all calculated. He wasn't just a disappointed father, he was a man desperately trying to keep me from discovering my true identity and reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I decided to hire a private investigator to verify the information. Detective Sarah Chen was recommended by a lawyer friend, and when I showed her the evidence, her eyes widened. "This is one of the most elaborate fraud schemes I've ever seen," she said. "If this is all true, we're talking about decades of identity theft, inheritance fraud, and embezzlement." The investigation revealed even more shocking details. Michael Harrison, my real father, had been a successful artist and businessman. He had inherited the family construction company from their father and had plans to expand it internationally. When he died, Robert was supposed to be a temporary guardian until I came of age. Instead, he had forged documents to make it appear that I was his son, not Michael's. Detective Chen found medical records that proved the lie. Blood tests from when I was a child, stored in hospital archives, clearly showed that Robert couldn't be my biological father. She also discovered that Linda had been involved in the scheme from the beginning. She had met Robert shortly after Michael's death and had helped him create the false documents in exchange for becoming his wife and securing her future. The most disturbing discovery came when we found Michael's original will. He had left everything to me, his son, with specific instructions that I should be raised to appreciate both art and business. He had even set up a trust fund for my education and artistic development. Robert had not only stolen my inheritance, but had actively worked to destroy the very talents my real father had wanted to nurture. "We have enough evidence to not only reclaim your inheritance, but to have Robert and Linda arrested for fraud," Detective Chen told me. "The question is, what do you want to do with this information?" I looked at all the evidence spread across her desk. 30 years of lies, betrayal, and stolen dreams. My fake father had not only robbed me of my birthright, but had poisoned my entire childhood with his guilt and resentment. It was time for justice, but I wanted to do this my way. I spent the next week crafting the perfect plan. I wasn't going to simply hand over the evidence to the police and let them handle it. No, Robert had psychologically tormented me for 32 years, making me believe I was worthless, that I didn't deserve love or success. He was going to experience the same humiliation he had put me through, but amplify. First, I contacted Robert's biggest business rival, Jonathan Steele. Steele Construction had been trying to acquire contracts from Harrison Construction for years. When I showed him the evidence of Robert's embezzlement, his eyes lit up. "If this gets out, Harrison Construction will be destroyed," he said. "The lawsuits alone will bankrupt him," but I had a better idea. "What if I told you there was a way to acquire Harrison Construction legally, for a fraction of its value, while ensuring that justice is served?" Jonathan was intrigued. We made a deal. He would provide me with the legal resources I needed, and in return, when I reclaimed my inheritance, I would sell him 40% of the company market value. Next, I reached out to Robert's biggest clients. I anonymously sent them copies of the financial documents showing how Robert had been inflating costs and skimming money from their projects. Within days, 3 major contracts worth $15 million were cancelled. Robert's empire was starting to crumble, and he had no idea why. The most satisfying part of my plan involved James, my half-brother. James had always been the golden child, but he had one weakness: gambling. I hired a private investigator to document his addiction, his debts, and most importantly, his recent partnership with Linda in a money laundering scheme. It turned out that the perfect son wasn't so perfect after all. I arranged for James to receive an anonymous tip about a sure bet on a horse race. The bait was too good to resist. He borrowed $500,000 against his future inheritance to place the bet. Of course, the horse lost. When Robert found out that James had gambled away $500,000, their relationship began to fracture. But the masterpiece of my revenge was what I had planned for the annual Harrison Construction Board meeting. Every year, Robert would gather with his investors, partners, and key clients to present the company's performance. This year's meeting was scheduled for Friday, exactly 1 week after he had disinherited me. I contacted every attendee and told them I had crucial information about the company's financial status that they needed to hear. I didn't reveal what it was, but I planted enough doubt to ensure they would all be there, eager to hear what I had to say. Meanwhile, I had my lawyer prepare all the legal documents needed to reclaim my inheritance. The DNA tests, the original wills, the evidence of fraud, everything was ready. Detective Chen had coordinated with the district attorney's office. Arrest warrants for Robert and Linda were prepared, waiting only for my signal. As Friday approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. In just a few days, I would destroy the man who had destroyed my childhood, but more importantly, I would finally honor my real father's memory and reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. Friday morning arrived, and I put on my best suit, ironically, one that Robert had bought me years ago, when he still hoped I might join his business. I arrived at the Harrison Construction building 30 minutes before the meeting, my briefcase filled with 30 years of evidence and a laptop containing the recorded conversations. The conference room was packed. All the major investors were there, along with key clients, board members, and of course, Robert, Linda, and James. When Robert saw me walk in, his face went pale. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" he asked, clearly nervous. "You have no business being in this meeting." "Actually, Robert," I said, emphasizing his name instead of calling him Dad, "I have more business being here than anyone else in this room." The confusion on everyone's faces was exactly what I had hoped for. I connected my laptop to the projector and began my presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. What I'm about to share with you will shock you, but I have evidence to support every single claim I'm about to make." The room fell silent. First, I showed them the DNA test results. My name is Marcus Harrison, and for 32 years, I believed that Robert Harrison was my father. The truth is, he is actually my uncle, and my real father was Michael Harrison, Robert's older brother who died in 1992. The gasps in the room were audible. "But that's impossible," one of the board members said. "We've known Marcus as Robert's son for decades." That's when I played the first recorded conversation. Linda's voice filled the room. "We need to make sure he never finds out the truth about Michael. If he discovers that he's the real heir, we lose everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert jumped up from his chair. "This is ridiculous. You can't believe this nonsense." But his panic was evident to everyone in the room. Linda, on the other hand, had turned completely white and was staring at the floor. I continued with the financial evidence. "For the past 30 years, Robert Harrison has been embezzling money from my father's trust fund, using it to build what you all believe is his empire." I showed them bank statements, forged documents, and the original will that proved I was the legitimate heir to the Harrison fortune. The room erupted in chaos. Investors were shouting questions, clients were demanding explanations, and board members were looking at Robert with disgust and betrayal. But I wasn't finished yet. "There's more," I said, raising my voice above the noise. "Robert and Linda have been systematically destroying evidence of my true parentage, manipulating legal documents, and committing fraud on a massive scale. But the most disgusting part is how they psychologically tortured me for years, making me believe I was worthless, while they enjoyed the fortune that rightfully belonged to me. James, who had been silent until now, suddenly stood up. "This is all lies. My father would never." But I interrupted him by playing another recording where Robert explicitly discussed how to break Marcus's spirit so he would never question his place in the family. The look of horror on James's face when he heard his father's cold, calculated cruelty was almost satisfying enough to end my revenge right there. The chaos in the conference room reached its peak when I played the final recording. In it, Robert and Linda discussed their plan to have me declared mentally unstable if I ever discovered the truth, so they could have me committed and maintain control of the inheritance indefinitely. "You sick bastard," shouted Mr. Richardson, one of the major investors. "How could you do this to your own nephew?" Other voices joined in, creating a cacophony of anger and disgust directed at Robert. Robert, realizing that his world was crumbling around him, tried one last desperate move. "Even if this is all true," he said, his voice shaking, "the statute of limitations has passed. Marcus can't prove anything in court after 30 years. That's when I smiled and delivered the final blow. "Actually, Robert, that's where you're wrong." I nodded toward the back of the room, and Detective Chen walked in, followed by 2 police officers. "The statute of limitations doesn't apply to ongoing fraud. You've been actively stealing from my trust fund until this year. Every false document you filed, every forged signature, every stolen dollar, it's all recent enough to prosecute." The blood drained from Robert's face as Detective Chen approached him. "Robert Harrison, you are under arrest for identity theft, inheritance fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Linda started crying and begging. "Please, Marcus," she sobbed. "I was just following Robert's plan. I never wanted to hurt you, but I had no sympathy left. She had actively participated in destroying my childhood and stealing my father's legacy." "Linda Harrison, you are also under arrest," Detective Chen continued, "for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and aiding and abetting identity theft." The second officer handcuffed her as she collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. James stood frozen, watching his parents being arrested. The golden child who had always looked down on me was now seeing his perfect world shatter. "What about me?" he asked quietly. "What's going to happen to me?" I looked at him with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. "That depends, James. You can cooperate with the investigation and help us recover all the stolen money, or you can go down with your parents. The choice is yours." The investors and clients were in complete shock. Mr. Richardson approached me, extending his hand. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. We all do. We should have questioned the inconsistencies over the years." Others nodded in agreement, realizing they had been complicit in Robert's deception simply by never asking the right questions. As Robert and Linda were led out of the building in handcuffs, Robert turned back to look at me one last time. The man who had spent 30 years making me feel worthless now looked broken and defeated. "You don't understand what you've done," he said bitterly. "You've destroyed everything." "No, Robert," I replied calmly. "I've simply reclaimed what was always mine. The only thing I've destroyed is your lies." The conference room slowly emptied as the reality of the situation sank in. I was no longer the disinherited disappointment. I was Marcus Harrison, rightful heir to a $50 million empire, and finally free from 32 years of psychological manipulation. The weeks following the arrests were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and personal transformation. The story of the Harrison construction scandal made national news, with headlines like "The 30-Year Fraud," "Uncle Steals Nephew's $50 million Inheritance" dominating the business sections of major newspapers. My lawyer, Patricia Williams, worked tirelessly to untangle the complex of a fraud that Robert had created. "This is one of the most elaborate inheritance scams I've ever encountered," she told me during one of our meetings. "The good news is that we have overwhelming evidence. The bad news is that it's going to take months to sort through all the financial damage." The first major victory came when the court granted an emergency injunction, freezing all of Robert's assets pending the resolution of the case. This included the family mansion, the vacation homes, the yacht, and most importantly, all the business accounts. Harrison Construction was placed under temporary management to prevent further financial damage. James, faced with the choice between cooperating or facing prosecution himself, chose to help with the investigation. During his testimony, he revealed details that even I hadn't known. My father was obsessed with keeping Marcus down, he testified. He would spend hours planning ways to undermine his confidence. He saw Marcus's artistic talent as a threat because it reminded him of Uncle Michael. The most shocking revelation came when James disclosed that Robert had actually been jealous of his own brother. Dad always felt that Michael was the favorite son, James explained to the court. When Michael died and left everything to Marcus, Dad saw it as his chance to finally have what he believed should have been his all along. Linda, desperate to reduce her sentence, provided even more damaging testimony. She revealed that Robert had forged not only my adoption papers, but also several business contracts over the years. The scope of his fraud extended far beyond just stealing my inheritance. He had been defrauding clients, investors, and partners for decades. The financial audit revealed the full extent of the theft. Robert had stolen approximately $35 million from my father's trust fund over the 30-year period. He had used this money to build his construction empire, buy properties, and maintain an extravagant lifestyle. The remaining $15 million of his current wealth came from legitimate business profits, but even those profits were built on the foundation of stolen money. As the evidence mounted, Robert's legal team advised him to accept a plea deal. He was facing up to 25 years in prison for the multiple charges against him. Linda, facing similar charges, was offered a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation and testimony against Robert. The most satisfying moment came when the court officially recognized me as Michael Harrison's son and the rightful heir to the Harrison family fortune. Judge Patricia Morrison, reading the decision, said, "This case represents one of the most egregious examples of family betrayal and financial fraud this court has ever seen. The defendant not only stole the plaintiff's inheritance, but also robbed him of his true identity and relationship with his deceased father's memory." 6 months after that life-changing board meeting, I stood in the office that had once belonged to my uncle Robert, but before him had been my father Michael's. The nameplate on the door now read Marcus Harrison, CEO. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had spent 30 years trying to keep me away from this legacy had ultimately led me right back to where I belonged. The legal proceedings had finally concluded. Robert was sentenced to 20 years in prison for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Linda received 10 years for her role as an accomplice. James, in exchange for his cooperation and testimony, received probation and community service. He had also agreed to pay restitution from his personal assets for the money laundering scheme he had participated in. The financial recovery was better than anyone had expected. Through asset seizures and legal settlements, we were able to recover $42 of the $50 million that rightfully belonged to me. The remaining $8 million was tied up in investments that had failed over the years, but the legal team was still working to recover some of those funds. More importantly than the money, I had finally learned the truth about my father, Michael Harrison. Through old friends, business partners, and family documents that Robert had hidden, I discovered that my father had been not only a successful businessman, but also a passionate artist. He had planned to create an art foundation in connection with the family business, something that would have combined his two greatest loves. I decided to honor his memory by implementing his original vision. I established the Michael Harrison Art Foundation, dedicating $10 million of the recovered funds to support young artists who, like me, had been told they weren't good enough or that art wasn't a real career. The foundation would provide scholarships, gallery spaces, and business mentorship to help artists build sustainable careers. The changes I made to Harrison Construction were equally significant. Instead of the cutthroat, profit-at-any-cost approach that Robert had implemented, I returned the company to the ethical principles that my father had originally established. We began offering profit-sharing programs for employees, implementing environmentally sustainable building practices, and establishing fair pricing policies for clients. Many of the clients who had been overcharged during Robert's tenure received refunds, which not only helped restore the company's reputation, but also felt like a form of justice for all the people he had defrauded over the years. The most unexpected development was my relationship with James. After the initial shock and anger subsided, he approached me with a genuine apology. "I spent my whole life believing I was better than you," he said, "but the truth is, I was just a puppet in my father's scheme. You had the courage to expose the truth and fight for justice. I respect that. We're slowly building a relationship based on honesty rather than the lies that had defined our childhood." He's working at a smaller construction company now, trying to rebuild his life and prove that he can succeed on his own merits rather than stolen wealth. Standing in my father's office, looking at the portrait of Michael Harrison that I had finally been able to display, I felt a sense of peace I had never experienced before. Today, as I tell you this story, I'm sitting in the art studio that I built on the top floor of the Harrison construction building. The same building where Robert once humiliated me, where he told me I wasn't worthy of the family name, is now the place where I honor both sides of my father's legacy, business and art. The journey from being disinherited to reclaiming my true identity taught me that sometimes the greatest betrayals come from the people closest to us, but it also showed me that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. My grandmother's courage in preserving the evidence and her faith that I would know what to do with it changed everything. I still paint every day, and every canvas reminds me of the father I never got to know, but whose spirit lives on in every brushstroke. The Harrison Construction Company now thrives under ethical leadership, and the Michael Harrison Art Foundation has already helped over 200 young artists start their careers. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear others like it, please subscribe to the channel. It would be an honor to have you here.